I know there are people out there who have sort of been looking at this and they think maybe it's on purpose, right? Maybe it's conspiratorial. Maybe basically Joe Biden is deliberately driving up energy prices so as to get everybody to embrace the sort of Green New Deal idea. If so, he's a moron, because the fact is that when energy prices are high, people have far less tolerance for this sort of gambling around and pretending that green energy is going to be the solution. Environmentalism is the privilege of rich countries and rich people. People who are poor don't care about it.
Okay, Ben Shapiro, a guy whose entire career has been given to him by millionaires and billionaires, is here to tell you what poor Americans think about and what should be done to advance their interests. There is more to what he said, which is not just purposefully dishonest, but also just casually wrong in a lot of ways that we're gonna break down. Here's a bit more of what he had to say.
People who are struggling to get by, they do not care about carbon emissions. They care about making sure they can get to work and get food on their family's table. That is what they care about. So if that's the plan, to purposefully drive up the price of energy in order to encourage people to go green, it is likely to backfire on the Democrats in pretty dramatic fashion. Instead, it seems more like to me, because Hanlon's razor I tend to attribute to stupidity rather than malice. Although in this case, it's stupidity combined with malice. When it comes to the Democratic Party, it seems much more like they are taking advantage of the price spike in order to push the Green New Deal kind of stuff, because their preferred solution is always the solution to any given problem. You saw this with Build Back Better, right? Inflation was happening, and so Joe Biden was like, Build Back Better is going to solve inflation. You're like, wait, no, like clearly not.
Conservatives are getting better at humor, and it's scaring us libs. Anyway, it was a terrible impression. So there's a lot there that's wrong. Before we launch into fact checks, I do want to give you a little bit of context on what he is saying. It was summed up very well by Justin Barragona on Twitter. Back on March 3rd, Ben Shapiro called Joe Biden a coward for not sanctioning Russian oil. He's sanctioning other things. Why doesn't he sanction the oil? So they ban the import of Russian fossil fuels. He immediately turns around and says they're an excuse so he can then blame Putin and Russia for gas prices. Rarely do you get a damned if you do, damned if you don't demonstration in such immediate, clear terms. But anyway, Anna, the larger point he's making is that Biden, who in his telling loves the Green New Deal and wants to pass it, is using this. He's purposefully driving up gas prices, which are great for his presidency, clearly. And poor people don't care about this stuff, shouldn't care about this stuff. It has no effect on their lives. What do you think about these claims?
Well, I actually think that he's hitting on a vulnerability in terms of what the response has been in terms of climate change, which the left should be a little more aware of. And I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I want to just talk about the orchestrated effort to make it appear as though this is some sort of conspiracy to get the Green New Deal passed. Listen, I have not heard a single Democrat in a position of power, certainly in the White House, who is advocating for green energy right now. Not a single example of it. Jen Psaki has been asked by Peter Doocy over and over again in press conference after press conference about the Keystone XL pipeline, about, this is the result of focusing on renewable energy, and he's been slapped down over and over again. Not with Psaki saying that we need to focus on renewable energy, but with Psaki correctly pointing out that the United States is the top oil and natural gas producer in the world. We're number one. Now, it's effort to understand why gas prices are high. Now, of course, it has to do with the sanctions on an oil-producing country like Russia, but how are oil prices established? Is it by the president of the United States unilaterally implementing prices that he likes? No, it doesn't work that way. The way it works is you have oil producing countries that are part of what's known as the OPEC cartel, and they oftentimes will withhold the production of energy with the very intention of artificially increasing energy prices so they can turn a profit. In the United States, even though we are the top oil producing country, the top natural gas producing country, these natural resources are not owned by us, the US taxpayers. It's not owned by the government. It is owned by private corporations who are seeking to maximize their profits. And so what we see in the United States is the export of these natural resources to other countries that have made deals with the private oil and gas industries within the United States, right?
Yeah.
So if Biden wanted to, he could unilaterally decide through an executive order to ban all exports. But I don't hear a single conservative talk show host or a single Republican lawmaker advocate for that, which I find curious. They don't ever mention it. The other thing that could be done on a state level is if there are certain gas taxes, they could be temporarily suspended, which I think it's fair to have a conversation about that as gas prices are like outrageous and it really is hurting the working class. So I'm open to that discussion. But overall, the only thing that Ben Shapiro said in that argument that we should be careful about is, of course, climate change overwhelmingly, disproportionately impacts poor people, not just in this country, but around the world. And the response to the climate emergency so far has been about individuals, what individuals need to do to respond to the climate emergency. I think that strategy has been disastrous because it is true that the very people who are most impacted with climate change are also most impacted by individual efforts to combat it. And so this goes back to the point that we make over and over again. We need to focus on the actual polluters rather than putting the onus on individuals, including the working class.
Exactly. No, you're 100% right. And we oppose the idea of making it all about individuals. If people want to be a part of the solution, they can, but there's only so much individuals can do. It's a ruse. It's an evasion to get people to distract themselves with little things they can do to help out a little bit and protect the actual established economic interests from any threat to their dominant position, which is also, by the way, the mission statement of the Ben Shapiro show. He is pretending that he cares about poor people's, like the cost of gas. He has no interest in long-term structural changes that will take away the ability of these authoritarian leaders of oil-producing countries to be able to not only do what's happening now, but to do it again in 2 years, or in 5 years, or in 10 years. He wants to keep the status quo, but he wants to spin his followers up until they're dizzy and they don't know how to advocate for their actual interests, pretending to care about them. First of all, poor people do care about the environment. They do care about their ability to breathe clean air, drink clean water. They care about the future. If you take a look at polls of what countries think climate change is a serious threat, it is predominantly the poorest countries in the world that take it the most seriously. And in times like this, you can already see there's tons of articles about people becoming far more interested in things like electric vehicles because of the situation. They do not agree with the right wing that the solution is just to drill more oil. And it's good that they don't, because as Anna points out, the right wing in situations like this will always pretend like they give a wink and a nod to effectively resource socialism. We'll drill more and that'll help us. No, as Anna's pointing out, no, it will be sold on the international market. It will make pennies difference, if anything at all. It isn't being drilled so that we can then use it. They understand exactly what message they're sending and what will happen in reality. But as you've been seeing on screen, pollution-related deaths happen almost entirely in low and middle income countries. And that same sort of situation can be found here in the US, where the poorest communities are the most affected. They do care about this. They are getting involved in environmental activism and centering concerns over the environment when choosing politicians. Ben's problem is that he doesn't want them to do that because he's there to protect corporations who would potentially be financially impacted by new regulations to lower carbon emissions. That is what this is about at the end of the day. He's using the poor, as the rich always do, to protect the rich, not the poor. Anyway, by the way, long term, really fast, by 2050, more than 570 coastal cities could be affected by sea level rise. As many as 1 billion people could be displaced by environmental hazards. Who's that gonna affect? The rich who can buy a second house and move? Or people who are gonna lose literally everything when their house goes underwater. Now, I understand he doesn't have the mental faculties to think about that, to respond to it. He said that when the sea level rises, people will just sell their house. To who? Nobody seems to understand. He certainly doesn't. And a ton of extra people, 100 million people are gonna be pushed into poverty just by climate change. over the next 8 years. That's the estimate. These are incredibly important issues, particularly for those at on the lowest rungs of the economic ladder. He understands that. He just doesn't have their interests in mind.
Check out the Damage Report podcast each day, wherever you get your podcasts, whether Pocket Casts or Stitcher or iTunes. You can join me as I give you the news and stories you want, with a range of co-hosts and interview guests jumping in on the fun each day. Again, that's the Damage Report, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you get them at iTunes, don't forget to rate and review. Sometimes I'll read them live on the show.